Our guest in studio today, Nick Binedell, the head of GIBS Business School, and on your way out, I hear.
Yes, that's right. I've had 15 wonderful years, and so I'm moving out of the role.
You said that you got really bad grades at school.
I did.
What made you focus and start working?
Well, I went to a good school, but I moved. My family lived in many countries when I was young, so we lived in 6 countries by the time I was 10. So it took me a while to settle down, I think, at school, and I didn't study enough. I'll explain bad marks in a minute. And then later in life, I think I found the things that I was passionate about. And so I went to university to BCom at Rhodes. And then after that, I had a wonderful short period in my career where I worked in London and New York. And I seemed then to have woken up to life's possibilities.
Life's possibilities. That's a wonderful expression. Does it have a specific meaning for you?
I worked for a company where I took minutes every Monday morning for about 4 years, listening to senior executives discuss the business. And I wasn't allowed to say a word. I said, take minutes. And I learned a lot from them about leadership, about business. It gave me a sort of a room with a view. And that stimulated my career in business. And shortly after that, I got a few promotions. And then I did an MBA and then ran a company at quite a young age. And that pressure really also opened up a panorama of what business was about and what was happening in the country at the time. I started teaching part-time, and I really relished that.
But you've said you were in New York on the 16th of June, 76, and you said that changed your life. Why and how?
Well, it had a big impact on me. I was far away, and the information came through what was then called a telex machine. And I worked in public affairs for Mobil Oil in their political affairs department. And I remember standing at the telex machine. I used to have to get the read, see what stories were coming up every day, and saw the story. And I remember the first opening lines of the AP Reuters. It said, a ball of smoke rose over Soweto Bay. It was home, had my attention. And I suppose it affected me more because I was so far away. And it really forced me to think about the country and where it was.
Did you consider not coming back?
No, when I went to do my doctorate in Seattle in the 80s, sometime later, I did wonder whether I'd come back. But once again, I just found. But I'll tell you the story. I was having a dinner party that lasted for many, many, many hours with good friends. And at some point, someone turned and said, "Oh, you're just like one of us." And I realized.
An American and Canadian then? No,
in
American.
America, yeah,
American.
in Seattle. And I realized, no, I'm not. And after I'd recovered from the hangover, I thought, well, actually, where do I belong? Certainly not in America, not in Britain. It's home. And I came home in the middle 80s, the week before the second state of emergency, the PW Britain closed. I came back to all of that and have been here ever since.
Yeah. Why were you not an American?
Because I'm an African.
In what way? What does that mean?
Because I think for most of my life I've been part of the dynamics of this amazing continent. I grew up in Kenya for some of my childhood, and I've traveled to the continent as we tend to, mainly in the south, but in more recent years everywhere. And I relish where we are.
I think it was Dr. Rupert who first said, here our lives actually make a difference.
Yes, this is an extraordinary country probably going to go through another extraordinary era of change. And I've seen 2 extraordinary years in my lifetime. And so there is something very compelling, I think, about being here and living your life as fully as you can and trying to make a contribution in whatever way is right for you and the situation, which is always changing so quickly.
And things are not settled here yet.
No.
So we can actually make a difference.
Absolutely. I'm very interested in deep structures and how they play their way out over long periods of time, not decades, but longer periods. Maybe as we get older, we look further back and try and look a bit further ahead. But I'm convinced South Africa will be a country in transition for the next 50, 60, 70 years, quite easily. We still have to find each other. And what's working and what's not working now, if you like, is these initial dynamics, given where we came from to where we are. We're in a much more open space now. Kada Asmal used to quote a lovely Irish poem that said, now that the fight for the mountains is over, the struggle for the plains begins. And we're in the plains now. The deeper structural stuff has to get dealt with. And this is a long journey, but it's one that changes all the time.
You were at Wits Business School in 92, from 92 onward. How did you experience that dramatic change at that point?
I was there from 86 to 98, head of the school for 6 years. And a few of us were quite engaged in political life then and brought some of that conversation into the curriculum. It was very fulfilling. We were challenged by many of the faculty. I always remember one discussion with a senior colleague who came up to me and he said, I hear you've been talking about politics in the classroom.
Oh dear.
And I looked at him and I said, I hear you haven't. So that was a bit of a discussion. But we worked hard to ensure that the issues of the day, I think as we do at GIBS, are in the curriculum, and that the dynamism of the country is reflected in the institution.
Did you see the university change at that time?
Yes, I think it went from a, I mean, WITS was a English language university with a very particular tradition in a mining town.
Classical liberalism?
No, I wouldn't. Well, that would be a long discussion as to what liberalism really means, yes, and how it changes its definition, and what that means in a colonial environment. Mm. It was a form of liberalism that had to do with a colonial outlook. But yes, for sure, the university went through dramatic change quite quickly. Some of it manageable and some of it not.
Like what? How did it change?
Well, I think, I mean, clearly, student who studied at the university changed dramatically.
Student body changed.
Yeah, and the politics of the student body changed. You know, if you think back, it's not so long ago, really, that we look back and say, if you think back to the time of Sarso and Steve Biko breaking away from NUSAS, and there's all been written about now, you know, NUSAS was rejected and then had to find its own way as a student body amongst mainly English universities, the so-called liberal ones we referred to, and find a political discourse and political action to bring about the change it believed in. So much of that kind of sentimentality was present at UCT, and that's, I think they were the main leaders of that argument.
Why did you move to, you started GIBS, hmm?
I
you
did,
were the founding head.
Yeah, I'd spent 13 years at WITS, which were very enjoyable years, and 6 as the head of the school. I did find the bureaucracy a little difficult at times, because it's a very big machine, and universities are often very centralized. I met Johan van Zyl, who was then the Vice Chancellor of the University of Victoria, now the CEO of Sanlam, at a chance encounter, and I'd already announced I was leaving, and he said, why don't you come and work with us? So I went to him with a proposition of starting a new school in Johannesburg, not Pretoria, but under the umbrella of the University of Victoria. That's how it began. And a lot of people didn't think there was room for another business school in Johannesburg, but there was. And our approach was to be very close to business, and to be applied in our thinking, to try and help people running businesses to do it a bit better with a bit of our help. And that's really where we started.
What is it like to start something from scratch?
It's scary. I once asked Johan, I said, what happens if this flopped? He said, I'll be doing agricultural research and you'll be chained to a desk next to me. It was a big risk that the university took, because I wasn't known to them. And it was a big responsibility to begin, because they funded it well. I said, if we're going to do it, we must do it well. And so they funded it well. And it was scary, although I knew quite a bit about what we were doing, because I'd run a business school and I'd been in business. And by then I'd been at this for quite a while and traveled around the world working with business schools. So I knew the territory, but it was quite a big risk. Mm. And we started out, I went and had endless cups of tea with chief executives in 1998 and 99, asking them what were the challenges in their businesses, and what they were thinking about. That helped me shape the philosophy of the school to be about certain themes that they were talking about.
I was going to ask that interplay between theory and practice. Can you really learn to be an entrepreneur, or even to run a business?
Well, I often get asked that, and the other question, can you learn to be a leader? And the answer is yes and no, but you can certainly accelerate. Almost all of us can learn about thinking like an entrepreneur, or thinking and behaving like a leader, but mainly it's got to come from somewhere else. It's got to come from your own kind of consciousness and your own philosophy and your own experience of life. So yes, I think you can accelerate it. Like most things, you can take someone who's no good at music, 10,000 hours, and give them a violin. If you train them long enough, they'll play reasonably. All of us can improve what we're doing in that area by studying best practice, by looking at bad practice, by observing ourselves in action, I think.
How has your approach changed over the past, what did you say, for 14 years now?
My own approach? Well, part of stopping is to have a look back and see, I suppose. I think we learn mainly by experience, actually. So how do you teach? You have to reflect on what you're doing a little more than normal. And I think most of us live such busy lives, we're always on to the next thing. And so quite early on, I developed 2 practices. One is when I got home, of reflecting on the day, what had gone well and what had not gone well. And also I used to take a week away to go and really think about life and what was happening around me. And I found both of those practices actually very helpful. I think we learn by experience. You can't teach all of this. So I think business schools can be useful, but you learn mainly by doing. You learn from doing in any craft. You can't play golf by watching a DVD. You have to actually hit the little white ball. So I think that's true in life. What business schools do and institutions of learning do is try and share some of the ideas of best practice, try and force you to make decisions about what it is you're doing. In other words, practice what you're doing, but mainly you learn by actually doing it. It's a craft. The Germans have a lovely word that I've been using, fingerspitzengefühl, the feeling in the fingers. And a lot of executive judgments in life are intuitive. It's more of a craft than a science. Anyone who thinks business is a science, I think, has a misplaced view.
What are the common things that trip entrepreneurs up?
Well, I think very often what happens is they have a flash of insight into something they think is unique. And they pursue, it's the better mousetrap. And they pursue that without really understanding what needs to come with it. So if you look at a lot of the big companies, they started by people later in life. You get the odd Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. That's quite rare. But often companies are started by people with some business experience, because a lot of it is not just about the good idea. It's about the organizational ability, the selling ability, the communication ability, being able to attract people to the idea. And so people associate entrepreneurship with a good idea. It's a good idea plus plus. Donald Gordon, who I knew quite well when he was at Liberty and later, was an incredibly clever guy, but he had this ability to attract people around him to make much of this happen. And many of our entrepreneurs are very, very good at this. Yeah. I can think of many names in Joburg of companies started by an individual, but what separates them from the person with a good idea is a series of good ideas, but more the ability to build an organization around it, rather than just the idea itself.
We used to say about the founder of Carte Blanche, Bill Forer, that he would walk through a room and throw silver balls into the air and walk out the other door, and other people had to catch them and keep them going.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, at GIBS, partly we talk about that every now and then, is that I was pretty scared and paranoid about whether this would work. I knew I was betting my career on it, apart from the university's reputation and capital, and the support we had from the Gordon family. But I ran, and when I looked over my shoulder, there were fortunately a few people behind me. And I've been very privileged to have a very stable team working with me over a long period of time now. And that's partly why this is the right time to think about moving on, and for someone else to give shape to the next phase of the school.
Are you moving on to something specific?
No, I'm going to be a professor at the school. I'm very conscious of staying out of the room and letting the new team led by the new leader take it forward. I'm going to teach, which I've been doing, but I'm really looking forward to sharpening that skill set again. And I'm going to take a bit of a break and get the octopus off my head. I always say running a company organization, you put an octopus on your head and you spend the year looking through other people's eyes. So get the octopus off my head and look again. And I'm fascinated by what's happening around us. Whether it's South Africa or the rest of the world, we're living in, I think, a most remarkable era in which the rate of change is going to accelerate, competitiveness is going to accelerate, the challenges we have are going to accelerate, and I want to take another look at them and see where there's a little contribution I can make in that broad agenda. I'm at that time of life where I've got a bit of agility and flexibility. So I think there's another something, but I'm not sure what it is at this stage.
Is that a bit scary, not to know?
Well, you know, the Americans have a lovely expression. They say you can't jump a chasm in 2 jumps. Chasms have to be 1 jump. So I've always said, when people used to talk about emigrating in the 80s, they used to say to me, we don't know where to go, so we're not sure we should emigrate. And I said, no, separate those. First you decide to emigrate, then you decide where to go. So I've decided to leave the role, and in my career at least, and I'm sure this is true for many people, when you stop something, the world, something else arises, and maybe look at it from another angle.
Partly because there's space.
Because there's space, yes.
Also in your own head.
And also, I think, and I've talked to a lot of CEOs who are retiring, or have retired recently, and there's a new energy because you are in a very particular role. I don't think people always, and it's not true of me, I run a small institution, but if you run a big institution, it's very easy not to realize how tough and pressured these jobs are. How many judgment calls you've got to make, how much uncertainty there is, how much expectation there is. So I think a lot of people, when it's like coming off a battlefield, you know, they come off and they need to refresh, and then maybe there's another thing they can do. And I'm very conscious these days that, you know, you don't stop at a certain age, you shift emphasis. And South Africa is one of these frontier countries where there's so many things going on that I think everyone in going through this process can find many, many more things to do. The country is just in its infancy in so many ways.
And you say that with a smile. Many people
Yeah.
in this country at the moment are saying, where are we going? And we're going off the cliff.
It's always been like that.
Yes, always.
So for me, in
South
a way,
Africa was going to blow up every 5 years
I remember reading a Newsweek magazine in about 1988 that said South Africa's faced with the empty promise of a foregone conclusion.
Sure.
Well, it's still like that.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Because if you looked in 88 and said where we'd be by 2000, they would have locked you up, right? Change your drug regime. If you look at where we ended up, you never know. So I look at the continent and all the opportunities there. I look at the transitions and transformations that are occurring. I look at GIBS and who comes through the school. We have lots of school kids come through and work at GIBS, 17-year-olds. They are extraordinary. So, no, I say, you know, we don't know. Why bother impaling yourself on the uncertainty when in fact there's so much you can do and we never know the outcome. That's life. So get on with it.
You also had children growing up, and you had to also be a father and a husband and all of that while your career was taking most of your time, I'm sure. Women always talk about the balance. Did you think about that consciously, or does a man just forge ahead?
I carefully look for the balance and kind of ignore it. No. Now I have one child, and she's in Scotland. I was very focused on the work, I have to say. It's very difficult. I think for women, it's just a much, much tougher thing than for men. I think some men battle with work-life balance. Some are obsessed by an idea and ignore it, and in a way lead an unhealthy life, but often they achieve great things. Others manage to find that rhythm and the balance and have all sorts of ways of doing it. But for women, it's a much bigger issue, I think, and a much bigger challenge for women, although I'm seeing so much change in that area as women take their place far more authentically as leaders now, and I think will in the future, especially in this country. It's very interesting how the role that women play in politics and in business increasingly.
And do you think that is affecting the way men look at their roles?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I mean, without making it overcomplicated, I think that the industrial era was a question of a certain kind of power, a lot of it brawn, muscle power, and we're in a knowledge era, and we're in a network era, and we're in a multidimensional decision-making era. All suit women more than men. Men are always A, then B, then C. Men are very focused on what they do. They're very rational thinkers. Women are far more intuitive and creative in that way. And I think around the world, this is a thing that's happening, which is wonderful to see. In South Africa, I think it's happening. And at GIBS, I mean, I think 70% of the people who work at GIBS are women. So that's a very encouraging thing. And both angles, they don't have to be male, female, but these different mix of skills, the artistic and the scientific and the intuitive and the rational and the sort of individualist versus the group, the emotional and supportive are all wonderful blends that you want in a society or organization.
And in a team.
And in a team. And then there's the generational story, which is so interesting, because young women are 17 today, as they should be, are very different than women who are older.
Talk to me about your home. Where do you live and what is it like and what sold that place to you?
I live down the road in Oxford Road, just off Oxford Road, in a home that's been redone and it's been opened up, which gives it lots of light. I started cooking more than I intended, and so I'm doing that, which I enjoy, not very well. And I have quite a big library. I do have a weakness for books.
For paper books?
Yeah, yes, and maybe I will now get more into it, but I can't read a book on Kindle the way I read a physical book still. And with the ability,
do you mark it?
Yeah, I do, but not with a marker. My thumbnail.
Oh, okay.
You're asking the interesting question. So I have quite a big library, and I'm an avid book buyer. And So my home is a bit about that, and the media. You know, I've always been a paper reader, and now, I mean, the joy now of the simple idea that all the information in the world is 2 clicks away, not the knowledge, but the information. I find myself getting lost in the forest. So I'll start on one topic, and I'll say, oh, let me Google that, and I'll look at that, and then 20 minutes later, I'm in another territory. I'm in Mongolia. It's fantastic. And the fact that a kid in Bangladesh can do that, if they've got access to the internet, as well as a kid in Silicon Valley, is an unbelievable thing I don't think we've understood yet. We're going to go through a process of remarkable human development. I'm convinced of it. It's going to be unequal, as it always is, but 3 or 4 billion people are going to have access to information that only 1 billion had before. And their creativity will change the planet. There's no question about it.
I was with someone the other day, an environmentalist, who said that how can we keep growing and think we can keep growing with finite resources? Right. And I thought, but the one thing that is not finite is what's happening in our heads.
Sure. Well, also the way we use resources. So if you look at agriculture today, everywhere in the world it's 5 times more productive because of scientific adaptation.
And that starts here.
And that all starts with the mind and science and technology, which I don't understand but love.
Thank you so much. And all of the very, very best. I hope you find very creative ways of filling that space that's opening up.
That's very kind of you. Thanks so much. Thank you.